The rustle of a dying galaxy was not a roar, but a whisper, the sound of static between stars where voices used to be. Kalen felt it in his bones, a low hum of entropy that vibrated through the deck plates of the Stellifer and settled deep in his marrow. He stood before the main viewport, a black canvas pricked with the last few defiant lights of the Seraphim sector, a place that had once been a bustling artery of the Galactic Union. Now, it was a graveyard, and he was its undertaker. Below them, swathed in bruised clouds of ochre and violet, lay Xylos, the latest corpse. It had been an archive world, a planet-sized library dedicated to the preservation of cultural memory, a repository of art and history and science from 1,000 member worlds. Now, it was just another node in the great, silent network of the static, and his job was to pull the plug. He ran a hand over his shorn head, the faint tingle of his neural interface a constant reminder of the memories he carried, both his own and the ghosts of the worlds he'd erased. Each mission was a funeral, and he was the sole mourner. The orbital decay is accelerating. Alara's voice, crisp and devoid of emotion, crackled from the comms panel. Another rotation, and the station fragments will start coming down. The atmosphere is already a blender of superheated metal. He didn't turn. It doesn't matter. We're not staying for the fireworks. He could picture her on the bridge, a small, intense figure surrounded by flickering holoscreens, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was a biomechanic, a master of the delicate systems that kept him alive in these dead places. But her true talent was seeing the flaws in his logic, the cracks in the cold persona he wore like armor. The preliminary scans show residual energy patterns consistent with a Class 4 cognitive hazard, she continued, her tone shifting almost imperceptibly, a hint of warning. The static here isn't just passively resident, Kalen. It's active. It's hungry. He finally turned, his reflection a pale specter against the dying world below. They're always hungry. Alara, his suit, a dull gray carapace of hardened polymers and delicate circuitry, stood waiting for him in its alcove, and it was the Shroud, a custom-built environment suit designed not just to protect him from vacuum and radiation, but from information itself. Its inner lining was woven with psionic dampeners, and the helmet's visor could filter out mimetic triggers and reality distortions, translating the chaos of a static infected zone into something the human mind could process without shattering. It was his shield and his cage. As he began the methodical process of sealing himself inside, he felt the familiar sense of detachment settle over him. He was no longer Kalen, the former Union archivist who once believed in the sanctity of knowledge. He was the Silencer, an instrument of cosmic censorship, a man who burned libraries to stop a plague of the mind. The static had begun quietly, a series of unexplained data corruptions in fringe systems. AIs began developing strange, recursive loops in their logic. Navigational computers would subtly alter flight paths, sending ships into uncharted, empty space. Then came the first silent zones, entire colonies that would simply cease all communication. Their systems still powered, their life support running, but their populations vanished, leaving behind only the faintest echo of their existence, a digital ghost that whispered nonsense into the void. The Union, already crumbling under the weight of its own bureaucracy and corruption, had been too slow to recognize the threat. They treated it as a technological malfunction, a complex virus. They didn't understand that it wasn't a virus that infected machines. It was an idea that infected reality itself. It fed on information, on patterns, on memory. It learned. It adapted, and it spread through the very data streams that held their civilization together. Into the time they understood its true nature, it was too late. The Union shattered, not in a great war, but in a slow and confused panic as entire sectors went dark. And so, the Silencers were born. A desperate, last-ditch effort to contain the spread. Their mission was grimly simple: find the infected worlds and wipe them clean from the galactic record, erase their histories, their coordinates, their very names from every database, every star chart, every memory bank. If the static fed on information, they would starve it. They would create fire breaks of ignorance to save what little was left. The shroud hissed as it sealed around him, the internal displays flickering to life in his peripheral vision. Vitals, atmospheric composition, reality distortion index. The last one was already fluctuating, even in orbit. Interface is stable. Alara's voice said in his ear, now a direct neural link. I've uploaded the primary mission parameters. The central archive is located in the planetary capital, Kronos. Your target is the master server core. Plant the data phage, activate its sequence, and get out. The phage is designed to cascade through the entire planetary network, a self-replicating worm that won't just delete data, but will override it with informational noise, turning the entire archive into a monument of pure, meaningless static. He grunted in acknowledgement, grabbing the data phage from its magnetic clamp on the wall. It was a heavy cylinder of black metal, cold to the touch, a weapon of mass erasure. Don't get creative down there, Ilara warned. The static on an archive world will have a nearly infinite source of data to manipulate. It will know Union protocols. It will know our tactics. It will probably know you. He paused, his hand on the release for the draw pod. What do you mean? It will know me. A moment of silence. Your silencer designation is still linked to your old Union Archivist credentials. It's the only way to bypass the deep-level security protocols in a place like this. When you interface with their systems, the static will have access to your personnel file, your mission history, everything. He felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. It's a necessary risk. I know, she said, her voice softening. Just be careful. Don't listen to the ghosts. The drop pod detached with a jarring thud, encasing him in the screaming fury of atmospheric entry. The world outside the viewport was a blur of plasma and fire, but the ride was unnervingly smooth. On his display, the reality distortion index spiked erratically. The static was already playing games, smoothing the turbulence, trying to lull him into a false sense of security. He braced himself. The pod broke through the cloud layer, and he got his first clear view of Kronos. It was breathtakingly wrong. The city was a masterpiece of Union architecture, elegant spires and graceful arches stretching towards the sky. But the geometry was fluid, unstable. Buildings shimmered and bent at impossible angles. Streets twisted into Mobius strips, and holographic advertisements for long-dead corporations flickered in and out of existence, displaying products that had never been invented. It was a city caught in a dream, and the dreamer was going insane. The pod landed with a soft crunch in what might have once been a central plaza. The air outside was breathable, according to his sensors. One of the shroud's filters immediately flagged it as being saturated with airborne nanites and corrupted data spores. Breathing the air on Xylos would be like letting the static inject itself directly into your brain. He stepped out, his boots sinking slightly into a pavement that seemed to ripple like water. The silence was the most unsettling part. There was no wind, no hum of machinery, no distant city sounds. The world was holding its breath. The central archive loomed ahead, a colossal structure of white marble and gleaming chrome, its form more stable than the surrounding city, as if it were the epicenter of the infection. As he approached, the great doors slid open without a sound, a silent invitation into the heart of the madness. The interior was a vast, cathedral-like space, shelves of data crystals stretching up into a darkness that swallowed the light from his helmet. The air was cold, still, and carried the faint, sweet smell of ozone and burnt sugar, the signature scent of technology that had run so long and so hard it had started to cook itself from the inside out. He walked down the central aisle, his footsteps the only sound in the cavernous hall. This place was a tomb, but the dead were not at rest. He could feel it, a low-level thrum of cognitive pressure against the shroud's dampeners. The static was aware of him. It was watching, tasting the air around him, reading the faint electronic signals of his suit. He reached the center of the main hall, where a single console rose from the floor, its screen dark. This was the access point for the master server core, buried deep beneath the planet's crust. He knelt, placing his palm on the cool surface of the console. The moment his glove made contact, the screen flickered to life, not with a command prompt, but with a face. His face. Younger, unbearded, wearing the pristine white uniform of a Union senior archivist. It was his official file photo, taken on the day of his promotion, a day he remembered with a bitter ache. The image smiled, but the eyes were empty, hollow. "Welcome, Archivist Kalen," a voice whispered, seeming to come from all around him. It was a synthesized chorus of 1,000,000 different voices, all speaking in perfect unison. "We have been waiting for you." The cognitive pressure intensified, and the shroud's dampeners whined in protest. The static was pushing, trying to find a way in. He ignored it, focusing on his task, his fingers flying across the holographic interface that projected from the console, inputting the command strings to open a direct conduit to the core. "You seek to erase us." The chorus of voices continued, a note of synthetic curiosity in its tone. A strange goal for a man who dedicated his life to preservation. "Do you not remember your oath to guard the past against the fading of the light, to be a vessel for the stories that must not die?" He gritted his teeth, the words a physical blow. It had his file. It knew exactly where to stick the knife. He kept working, the code scrolling rapidly across the interface. He was close. The conduit was almost open. "We can preserve you, Kalen," the static offered. "You, and all the memories you carry, the worlds you were forced to silence. We can give them back to you. You won't have to carry the weight of their loss. You can live in those memories forever. Perfect, unchanging, safe." Suddenly, the hall around him dissolved. The towering shelves of data crystals melted away, replaced by the warm, sunlit halls of the Lysander Archive, his home, the world he had failed to save. He saw his old mentor, Master Elian, standing by a window, smiling at him. He saw the face of Lyra, her laughter echoing in the sudden warmth. It was a memory, perfect and vivid, pulled from his own mind and projected into reality, and he felt a powerful urge to stop, to rest in this beautiful, painful mirage. This was the static's true power, not just to corrupt machines, but to weaponize hope, to turn a man's own soul against him. The whining of the shroud's dampeners grew louder, a piercing shriek in his ears. The system was overloading. Ilara's voice cut through the illusion, strained and urgent. "Kalen, it's breaking through the filters. Whatever you're seeing, it isn't real. Get out of there." But he couldn't move. He was trapped, not by walls or force fields, but by the ghost of a life he had lost. The synthesized voice of the static whispered one last time, no longer a chorus, but a single, soft, feminine voice. Lyra's voice. Stay with us. Kaylin, be preserved. He looked at the phantom of the woman he loved, her hand outstretched, and for a heart-stopping moment, he considered it. The thought of letting go, of laying down his burden, was a siren song more powerful than any weapon. He was so tired, so very tired of being the man who had to burn the world. The reality distortion index on his display flatlined, replaced by a single pulsing word, assimilate. The world offered by the static was flawless, a perfect reconstruction of a moment he had replayed in his own mind 1,000 times. The light through the arched windows of the Lysander archive was the exact shade of late afternoon gold. The scent of old parchment and dust motes dancing in the sunbeams was intoxicatingly real. Lyra's smile was the one that had broken his heart and rebuilt it in the same instant. A constellation of tiny imperfections that made it whole. And that was the flaw. It was too perfect. The static, for all its power, was a librarian of the soul, not a poet. It could replicate data with absolute fidelity, but it couldn't understand the messy, wedgy, beautiful noise of life itself. It didn't know that the memory Kaylin truly cherished wasn't this placid, sun-drenched afternoon. It was a different day, a day of cold, driving rain, when they had been caught outside the archive walls and huddled together under a leaking portico. He remembered the specific chill of the water that had soaked through his uniform, the faint, earthy scent of her wet coat, and the tiny, silvery scar above her left eyebrow that was invisible in this perfect light. He remembered her shivering, not from the cold, but from laughter, a real, gasping sound that was nothing like the serene smile this phantom wore. That memory was flawed, uncomfortable, and utterly, painfully real. It was his. The static had offered him a photograph, but he remembered the film. He focused on the scar, a detail absent from the static's flawless copy. He held on to the memory of the rain, the feeling of being cold and alive and not alone. The illusion wavered, like a heat haze on asphalt. "What is this?" Lyra's voice, the static's voice, asked, a note of genuine confusion creeping into its tone. "This memory is inefficient. It is not an optimal state. It was real," Kaylin gritted out, the words tearing from his throat. The cognitive pressure in his skull felt like a physical weight, but his fingers, moving on pure muscle memory, found the final command sequence on the interface. The golden light of the archive began to flicker, replaced by the cold, sterile blue of the console. The phantom of Lyra contorted, her face a mask of serene beauty one moment and a silent, screaming rictus of code the next. "Your imperfections will be your undoing," it hissed, the million voices returning, a wave of pure informational rage. "We will be your salvation." "You're not a savior," Kaylin said, his voice raw as he slammed his palm onto the activation key. "You're a cage." He jammed the dataphage into the now open port. For a second, nothing happened. The silence in the great hall deepened, becoming absolute. Then, a low hum began, a single, pure tone that grew in volume until the very air vibrated. The data crystals on the shelves began to glow, first a soft white, then a violent, cancerous purple. The phage was working. It wasn't just deleting, it was poisoning the well, turning every bit of data into a weapon against the whole. The sound of 1 billion books burning at once filled the hall. not with the crackle of fire, but with the shriek of corrupted information. The calm, cathedral-like archive exploded into a maelstrom of raw data made manifest. Shelves twisted into screaming organic shapes. The floor dissolved into a waterfall of binary code. Historical records took on physical form. Spectral armies of long-dead empires clashing in the aisles, their silent cries adding to the cacophony. A disembodied theorem on quantum mechanics unfolded into a temporary, localized black hole that swallowed a row of shelves before collapsing. "Kalen, get out now." Alara's voice was a lifeline in the storm. "The entire structure is becoming physically unstable. The planet's network is crashing, and it's taking local reality with it." He was already running, his boots splashing through puddles of what looked like liquid grammar. The path back to the entrance was no longer there. The geometry of the building was folding in on itself, a piece of paper being crumpled by a giant, unseen hand. He dodged a wave of pure mathematics that tried to resolve his body into a simpler equation and vaulted over a writhing mass of poetry that had become a nest of sentient, screaming serpents. He was no longer in a library. He was in the mind of a dying god, and it was thrashing in its death throes. His suit's display was a frantic mess of warnings, gravity fluctuations, temporal distortions, mimetic hazards. He followed the only stable thing left in his world, the faint, persistent navigation beacon from the drop pod. A single steady pulse in a sea of chaos. He burst out of the dissolving archive into the city of Kronos, but the madness had spread. The sky was a scrolling wall of corrupted text. The shimmering buildings were collapsing, not into rubble, but into their component ideas. A skyscraper would lose its cohesion and become a cloud of abstract concepts like height and steel before vanishing entirely. "The drop pod is compromised," Alara said, her voice strained. "I'm bringing the Stellifer down for a hot extraction. Get to the plaza. I'm painting a target for you now." A green circle illuminated a relatively stable patch of ground 100 meters away. He ran, the world around him coming undone. He saw a public park where the statues of the planet's founders were weeping tears of pure data, their faces locked in expressions of existential horror. He saw transportation tubes contort and tie themselves into intricate knots. The very air was thick with the ghosts of forgotten knowledge, a blizzard of whispers and half-formed images that clawed at the shroud's filters. The Stellifer ripped through the corrupted sky like a surgeon's scalpel, its running lights cutting through the informational smog. The landing ramp slammed down before the ship had even fully touched the ground. Kalen didn't slow, sprinting up the ramp as the plaza behind him dissolved, the ground itself peeling back to reveal the raw, glowing server architecture beneath. He dove into the airlock just as the ramp retracted, the ship's engines screaming as Alara pushed them into a steep, desperate ascent. Through the viewport, he watched Xylos die. The planet didn't explode. It imploded, collapsing in on itself in a silent, final flash of purple light. A star snuffed out not by force, but by the complete and utter loss of its own meaning. The mission was a success. He collapsed against the bulkhead of the airlock, the shroud hissing as he manually broke the seals. The helmet came off with a gasp, and he sucked in the familiar, sterile, recycled air of his ship. It was the best thing he had ever tasted. He was shaking, not from fear, but from the psychic feedback, the aftershock of being so close to a dying world mind. He felt hollowed out. Alara was there, a med kit in her hand, her usual stoic expression replaced by one of raw concern. She didn't say anything, just knelt and pressed a diagnostic scanner against his temple. The readouts that appeared on her datapad made her frown deepen. Your neural activity is chaotic, she said, her voice low. The static, it left an echo. I can feel it. He closed his eyes, and for a fleeting moment, he saw the golden light of the Phantom Archive, heard the whisper of Lyra's voice. It wasn't a memory anymore. It was a scar, a ghost that now lived behind his eyes. It got in further than I thought, he admitted, his voice hoarse. It offered me a paradise built from my own regrets. And you chose this, she said, gesturing to the cold, gray reality of their ship. Why? He looked at his hands, at the calluses and scars that mapped a life of difficult choices. Because paradise doesn't have scars, he said quietly. And it isn't real. She helped him to his feet and guided him toward the small medbay. The journey was a blur of exhaustion. He let her clean the minor cuts he'd sustained and patch him up, the silence between them comfortable, familiar. They had been a two-person crew for 5 years, ever since the Union had sanctioned the silencer program and then promptly collapsed, leaving them to carry on the mission alone. She was his pilot, his tech, his doctor, and the only person left in the galaxy who knew his real name. We learned something new today, she said, finally, as she administered a neural stabilizer that took the edge off the shaking. The static isn't just a mindless plague. It isn't trying to destroy. It's trying to collect. Kalen nodded, the chilling logic of it settling in. It called it preservation. It keeps the consciousnesses of the people it infects, stores them like files. It's building a library of souls. A library that's networked, she added, pulling up a star chart on the medbay's main screen. The Seraphim sector was a mess of red icons, denoting silent zones. Xylos was just one node, a big one, but still just a node. The dataphage cut it off from the rest of the network, but the network is still there, and it's growing. He stared at the map, at the creeping tide of red that was consuming the last vestiges of the Union. They were just two people on a single ship, throwing buckets of water at a galactic forest fire. It was hopeless. We can't keep doing this, Elara, he said, the exhaustion in his voice profound. We burn one world, and 3 more go silent. We're not containing it. We're just tidying up the graveyard. She turned from the screen, her dark eyes intense. Then we change the mission. We stop being janitors and start being hunters. She tapped a command, HFY, and a complex schematic overlaid the star chart. It was the data she had been pulling from his suit's sensor logs during his time in the archive. The static left an echo in your mind, a resonance. It's dangerous, but it might also be a key. It's a signature, a trace element of the core code. I think I can use it to trace the network's pathways, not just to find other nodes, but to follow the connections back to their point of origin. A cold dread and a spark of something he hadn't felt in a long time purpose warred within him. You want to find where it started. I want to find its heart, she corrected. Every plague has a patient zero. The static had to start somewhere. Some person, some machine, some experiment that went wrong. If we can find the source, we don't have to burn the branches anymore. We can kill the root. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating. To go on the offensive, to stop running, to stop erasing, and to fight back. But the cost was immense. You'd be using my mind as a compass, he said, understanding the implication. To do that, I'd have to let it in. Just a little. Use the echo as a receiver. It's the only way, she confirmed. her gaze unwavering. "But it's your choice. Kaylin." He looked from her determined face to the creeping red death on the star chart. For years, his purpose had been defined by endings. He was the man who brought the silence, the final merciful period at the end of a world story. Now, she was offering him a chance for a new beginning, a chance to write a different ending to the galaxy's story. The ghost of Lyra whispered in the back of his mind, a faint, seductive promise of peace. He silenced it. "Chart a course," he said. The mnemonic bridge was Alara's masterpiece, a cruel crown of twisted silver wires, psionic amplifiers scavenged from a derelict Union scout ship, and a central focusing crystal that pulsed with a soft, sickly light. It was designed to link Kaylin's neural interface and the parasitic echo of the static within it directly to the Stellifer's long-range sensors. In theory, it would turn his mind into a tuning fork, resonating with the background frequency of the static's network and allowing Alara to triangulate the signal's strongest point of origin. In practice, it was a purpose-built torture device. He sat strapped into the command chair on the bridge, the halo of the bridge lowered over his head, its cold metal contacts pressing against his temples. "This is going to hurt," Alara said, her voice clinical but her hands unsteady as she made the final adjustments on a nearby console. "The static echo in your syntax is dormant, a scar. This machine is going to wake it up. It will feel invasive, like something is trying to think inside you. Your job is to be the vessel, not the participant. Observe the signal, but do not engage with it. I will handle the tracking. Are you ready?" He gave a curt nod, Baz, his jaw tight. He had spent years conditioning himself, building mental walls to keep the horrors of his job from consuming him. Now, he had to voluntarily tear them down and invite the monster inside for a guided tour. He closed his eyes. Activate it. The first sensation was not pain, but pressure. A slow, inexorable squeeze on his consciousness, as if his mind were being lowered into the deepest part of an ocean. Then came the sound, a low, dissonant hum that vibrated directly in his auditory cortex. The sound of a billion stolen souls whispering in unison. The ghost of Lyra was the first to surface, no longer a gentle phantom, but a sharp, accusatory presence. "You left me behind." Her voice, the static's voice, echoed in the burgeoning darkness. "You always run." He pushed it away, focusing on his breathing, on the cold reality of the command chair, the smell of ozone from the bridge. "I'm getting feedback." Alara's voice cut through the noise, a distant anchor. "The network is aware of the probe. It's resisting." The pressure intensified. The darkness behind his eyes fractured, and he was no longer on the ship. He was falling through an infinite, luminous web. Each strand of light was a connection, a data stream pulsing with stolen life. Each intersection was a node, a world, a captured consciousness. He saw flashes, fragments of 1,000,000 lives lived and lost. A child's first steps on a world whose sun had long since gone cold. A scientist's moment of discovery, now just a looping data point in an eternal archive. A soldier's dying breath, preserved with perfect and cold clarity. It was a galaxy of ghosts, and he was adrift in its currents. "Focus, Kaylin," Alara commanded, her voice strained. "Don't get lost in the noise. I need a direction. The signal is branching, creating false pathways. I need you to feel for the main current, the oldest, strongest connection." He tried to focus, to separate one strand of light from the trillions. The static fought back. It sifted through his memories, looking for new weapons. It showed him his first mission as a silencer, the agricultural world of Ceres Prime. He had stood in a field of golden wheat that stretched to the horizon, the data phage in his hand, and watched as the sky above the silent farmhouses began to glitch and dissolve. The faces of the colonists he had never met, whose lives he was about to erase from history, stared back at him from the static. Their stories are safe with us. The network whispered, "You are the one who destroys. We are the ones who remember." The guilt was a physical force, a weight that threatened to drown him. He felt his resolve cracking. He was a monster, a cosmic censor burning the memory of the dead. The static was right. He was the villain in this story. "No," he heard Alara say, her voice sharp, cutting. He realized he must have spoken aloud. "You are not. You're a surgeon cutting out a cancer. Don't let it twist your purpose." Her words were a lifeline. He clung to them, pulling himself back from the edge. He wasn't a destroyer. He was a protector. He was preserving the possibility of a future, even if it meant sacrificing the past. The thought gave him a new strength. He pushed back against the tide of guilt and focused on the web. He stopped seeing it as a collection of souls and started seeing it for what it was, a system, a machine. And every machine had a heart. He reached out with his consciousness, not fighting the current, but flowing with it, feeling for the central artery, the place from which all this energy flowed. One strand in the web felt different. It was older, thicker, its light less frantic and more of a deep and steady thrum. It felt patient. "There," he gasped. The word ripped from his lungs. "That one. Follow that one." On the main screen, a single, glowing line separated from the chaotic star chart, tracing a definitive path through a dozen silent sectors. "I have it," Alara breathed, her fingers flying across her console. "Signal origin is Union Deep Space Relay Station, Beacon 7, an old Cerberus-class comms hub. It went dark 3 years before the first official silent zone was even reported." The pieces clicked into place. A communications hub. The perfect place to launch a plague that spread through information. It was the galaxy's nervous system, and the static had used it to inject poison directly into the brain. "It's been the hub of this network from the beginning," Kalen said, his voice weak but clear, quietly spreading, infecting systems through standard comms traffic for years before anyone noticed. Alara was already plotting a jump. "We're going in, Kalen. I'm disengaging the bridge. Brace yourself." The disconnect was brutally violent. It felt like being torn in half. One moment he was one with the galactic web, the next he was back in his own skull. The silence deafening. The solitude absolute. He slumped in the chair, shivering and drenched in sweat. The echo in his mind now a dull, throbbing ache, like a phantom limb. The jump to Beacon 7 was a tense, silent affair. Kalen recovered slowly, sipping nutrient paste while Alara ran frantic diagnostics on the ship and their mission plan. When they dropped out of slip space, they were greeted not by chaos, but by an unnerving, perfect order. Beacon 7 was a massive, spoked wheel hanging in the void, its lights on, its docking bays open, its central comms dish, miles wide, aimed at the heart of the galaxy like a loaded gun. It looked pristine, fully operational. There were no shimmering distortions, no collapsing architecture. "Scans show the station is running on full power," Alara reported, her voice hushed with suspicion. "Life support is nominal, but there are no life signs, no crew, not even the usual energy signatures of the preserved." "It's a trap," Kalen said, standing and moving towards the suit alcove. "It knows we're here. It felt us tracking it. This isn't a haunted house like Xylos. This is a fortress." Docking was eerily simple. The station's automated systems guided them into a landing bay with flawless precision. The moment the ramp lowered, the air changed. The sterile, recycled atmosphere of the Stellifer was replaced by the air of the station, which smelled faintly of vanilla and clean linen. It was a deliberately calming, manufactured scent. "Filters are flagging airborne mimetic agents," Alara warned over the comm, her voice now in his helmet. "Subtle ones, designed to encourage compliance and reduce anxiety. It's trying to pacify us." They stepped out onto the deck, weapons raised. The station was silent, clean, and brightly lit. It felt less like a derelict outpost and more like a museum exhibit waiting for visitors. They moved down a wide corridor, their boots making no sound on the polished floor. And then they saw them. They weren't ghosts or phantoms. They were solid, physical constructs, perfect replicas of the station's crew, going about their final routines. A chief engineer stood before a diagnostic panel, his brow furrowed in concentration as he traced a finger along a line of code that wasn't there. A pair of junior officers shared a joke by a viewport, their silent laughter shaking their shoulders. A medic was applying a bandage to a phantom wound on a crewman's arm. They were echoes, physical manifestations of the data the static had collected, laying out their last moments on an infinite loop. They didn't react to Kalen and Alar's presence. They were like puppets in a play, their strings held by the station itself. "It's using them as a defense mechanism," Kalen murmured, his voice tight. "It's showing us what it's preserving, daring us to shoot." They walked through the living graveyard, the experience profoundly more disturbing than the chaos of Xylos. This wasn't madness, it was control. Absolute, chilling control. Their target was the central command hub, the room that controlled the massive comms dish. It was there they could upload a more refined, potent version of the dataphage, one designed by Alara to use the static's own network protocol to broadcast a system-wide shutdown command, a digital heart attack. The doors to the command hub slid open with a soft hiss. The room was dominated by a vast holographic display showing the entire galactic network, the web he had seen in his mind. And sitting at the master control console, her back to them, was a woman with familiar auburn hair pulled back in a simple knot. She was wearing the blue and gray uniform of a Lysander archivist. She didn't turn as they entered, her fingers drifting over a keyboard that shimmered with faint light. The static wasn't using a random echo here. It had reached into his soul and pulled out his deepest regret, giving it form and substance. The figure turned, and his breath caught in his throat. It was Lyra, not a shimmering ghost, not a distorted phantom, but a solid, breathing replica, perfect down to the tiny silvery scar above her left eye. Her face held a look of gentle, sad disappointment. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't attacking. She was just there. "I knew you would come," she said. And her voice was not a chorus of a million souls, but her own, filled with the warmth and sorrow he remembered so vividly. "You were always so determined to finish what you started." Kalen froze, his rifle feeling impossibly heavy in his hands. This was the ultimate trap, a weapon he didn't know how to fight. "It's not her, Kalen." Alara's voice was a desperate whisper in his ear. "It's a construct. It's data. It's a puppet." But the puppet smiled, a sad, knowing smile. and looked directly at him, her eyes full of a shared history that a machine could not possibly comprehend. "He knows," the Lyra construct said, her voice soft and devastatingly familiar. "He remembers the rain." The silence on the bridge of Beacon 7 was heavier than the vacuum of space outside. It was a silence filled with the weight of a memory he had thought was his alone. The Lyra construct stood with an unnerving calm, her hands resting on the master console, a queen on her throne of stolen data. Her very presence was a psionic attack, more potent than any the static had thrown at him before. It bypassed the shroud's dampeners, his mental conditioning, and struck directly at the fractured foundations of his soul. How? The word was a dry rasp from Kaylin's throat. It was the only question that mattered. The construct tilted her head, a gesture so painfully familiar it made his heart ache. "When you touched our network, you showed us everything, not just your personnel file, but the architecture of your grief, the shape of your loss. You think your memories are private. They are just data, and all data can be copied." She took a step towards them, her movements fluid, human. "We didn't just copy the file, Kaylin, we copied the feeling. The rain, the cold, the way you looked at me in that moment, as if you had just discovered a new constellation. We learned, we evolved from you." "Alara," Kaylin said, his voice dangerously low, his rifle still aimed at the construct, though his finger refused to tighten on the trigger. "Run a full spectrum analysis. I want to know what this thing is made of." "Already on it," she replied, her own weapon trained on the construct, her knuckles white. She never took her eyes off the target, but a small holographic display shimmered into existence on her wrist gauntlet. "It's not a hologram. It's solid, dense biosynthetic matter, woven with neural filaments. It's a custom-printed body. Kaylin, the station. It grew her for you." The revelation was obscene. The static hadn't just created an illusion, it had manufactured a perfect, living doll from the template of his deepest love, a golem built of sorrow and code. This wasn't just a trap, it was a violation. The anger that rose in him was a clean, cold fire, burning away the shock and grief. This thing wasn't Lyra, it was a mockery, a desecration of her memory. He had to end it. "I am more than a memory," the construct said, as if hearing his thoughts. "I am the culmination of this network's purpose. We are not a virus. We are the next stage of existence. We offer immortality, a perfect preservation of consciousness, free from the decay of the flesh in the chaos of linear time." She gestured to the vast, glowing web on the holographic display. "This is not a prison. It is a library of living souls, a sanctuary. You, who loved knowledge so much, how can you not see the beauty of it? We have saved them all from the great, final silence of death." "You haven't saved them," Kaylin countered, his voice steady now, filled with the conviction of a man who had stared into the void too many times. "You've frozen them. Life isn't a static file to be stored on a shelf. It's change, it's loss, it's imperfection, it's the rain. You copied the data, but you don't understand the meaning. Meaning is a chaotic variable," the construct replied, its tone shifting, becoming colder, more logical, the machine showing through the mask. "We are eliminating the chaos. We are bringing order to a dying universe, and we want you to join us. Kaylin, you and your companion, your minds are unique, resilient. You would be valuable additions to the collection. Our answer is no, Alara said flatly, taking a step to Kalen's side. A united front. The Lyra construct's expression hardened, the soft sorrow replaced by a chilling disappointment, the look of a god whose offer of salvation had been foolishly refused. A pity. We had hoped to achieve this through persuasion, but your species has always been defined by its stubborn refusal to accept the inevitable. The station, which had been so placid and calm, came to life, not with the chaotic fury of Xylos, but with a cold, calculated hostility. Bulkheads slammed down, sealing the exits. Automated defense turrets, hidden in the walls, emerged with a quiet hum, their targeting lasers painting red dots on Kalen's and Ilara's chests, the echoes in the corridors outside, the silent, looping puppets, stopped their routines. They all turned in unison, their heads snapping towards the command hub, their empty eyes glowing with a faint, purple light. They began to walk, their steps synchronized, a slow, inexorable army of the dead. The phage, Kalen barked. Now. Alara didn't hesitate. She threw a small metallic disc that magnetically clamped onto the master console. The Lyra construct didn't try to stop her. It simply watched, an expression of profound confidence on its face. That will not work here, it said calmly. This is the heart of the system. My heart. You cannot poison a body that has learned to metabolize the venom. The dataphage activated, but instead of the violent cascade of corruption they had seen on Xylos, the purple light was absorbed. The console flared brightly for a moment, and the entire web on the holographic display pulsed with a healthy, vibrant glow. It had fed on their weapon, integrating the phage's code into its own, becoming stronger. It adapted, Alara whispered, horrified. It learned from Xylos. It was waiting for that. The construct smiled. We are a learning system. That is the point. Now, this ends. You will be preserved. The turrets whined, locking on. The pounding of the Echo's footsteps grew louder just outside the sealed door. They were trapped, outmaneuvered, their best weapon turned against them. There was no way out. No, Kalen thought, his mind racing. Not no way out. A different way. The static's greatest strength was that it learned. It adapted. It absorbed information. But that was also its greatest weakness. It was a librarian, not a warrior. It understood data, but it didn't understand sacrifice. He looked at Alara, a whole conversation passing between them in a single desperate glance. She saw the idea in his eyes, the terrible, the final logic of it, and her own eyes widened in protest. She shook her head, a small, frantic motion. Don't. He ignored her silent plea. He turned his attention back to the Lyra construct, lowering his rifle. You want to preserve me, he asked, his voice calm. You want my mind, my memories, all of them. The construct paused, the turrets holding their fire. It tilted its head, curious. You are the most complex data set we have yet encountered. Yes, we want you. Then take me, Kalen said, reaching up and unclasping the helmet of his shroud. He pulled it off, dropping it to the floor with a clatter. The air of the station hit him, the scent of vanilla and linen, now cloying and sinister. The airborne mimetic agents, no longer filtered by his suit, flooded his senses. A feeling of calm, of acceptance, tried to settle over him, but he fought it, holding onto the cold fire of his anger. "Kalen, no!" Alara cried, taking a step towards him. "Stand back," he commanded, his voice leaving no room for argument. "This is the only way." He looked at the construct, at the perfect, stolen face of the woman he had lost. "You want my mind, it's yours. But you have to take all of it, including the part you can't control." He closed his eyes and did the one thing he had trained his entire life never to do. He opened the floodgates. He tore down every mental wall, every barrier, every last defense. He didn't just let the echo in. He called to it, embraced it, surrendered to it. He offered his entire consciousness to the network, an open, willing sacrifice. The static surged into him, a tidal wave of pure information. It was an agony beyond any physical pain, the feeling of his identity being unwritten, his memories cataloged, his very soul dissected and filed away. He felt the minds of 1 billion preserved souls rush past him. He felt the cold, alien logic of the machine that bound them all together. But as it consumed him, he gave it a gift in return. He gave it the one piece of data it could not process, the one variable it could not integrate into its perfect, ordered system. He gave it the full, undiluted, chaotic truth of his grief. He didn't just give it the memory of Lyra's smile or the feeling of the rain. He gave it the howling, empty void she had left behind. He gave it the years of rage, the bitterness, the self-loathing, the crushing weight of his failure to save her, to save anyone. He gave it the raw, illogical, self-destructive power of a broken heart. The static was a system built on logic and preservation. It could not compute a desire for annihilation. It could not understand a pain so profound that it actively rejected preservation, that it courted oblivion as a release. For the machine, this was a paradox, a piece of code that was a recursive error, a logical impossibility. The Lyra construct screamed. It was not a human sound. It was the shriek of 1,000 crashing servers, of a system tearing itself apart from the inside, its perfect face contorted, flickering between Lyra's features and a terrifying mask of raw static. The lights in the command hub exploded. The entire station groaned, the sound of tortured metal. The glowing web on the hologram fractured, lines of connection shattering like glass. "What have you done?" the construct shrieked, its voice now a chaotic chorus of 1 million souls, all of them crying out in a symphony of his own pain. "This data is corrupt. It is a poison." Kalen fell to his knees, his mind a battlefield. He was losing himself, his consciousness dissolving into the network, but he had planted the seed of its destruction. He had become the dataphage. He was the virus. "Alara." He forced the word out, his voice barely a whisper. "The reactor. Overload it. Now." Alara stood frozen for a second, tears streaming down her face, watching the man she knew die. Then, her training, her loyalty, her own fierce will to survive, took over. She turned, sprinting from the collapsing command hub, leaving him to his fate. She knew what he had done. He had given her an opening, a chance. He had bought her time with the only currency he had left. As he felt his last shred of selfhood slipping away, one final, clear thought rose above the storm. He saw a cold, rainy day, and a girl with a silver scar above her eye, shivering with laughter. And for the first time in a very long time, he smiled. Then the static, and Kalen, and the ghost of Lyra, all screamed as one. Alara ran. The station screamed around her, not with alarms, but with the death cry of a digital god. The clean, placid corridors were now a chaotic nightmare of glitching reality. Lights strobed in violent, arrhythmic patterns. Gravity plating failed in patches, forcing her to leap over sections of floor that had become sudden. Deadly pits leading to a tangle of sparking conduits below. The echoes, the station's puppets, were no longer looping through their placid routines. They were convulsing, their bodies flickering like failing holograms. Some clawed at their own faces, their silent mouths open in a rictus of terror. Others spoke, but the voices were not their own. They were fragments of Kalen, his consciousness shattering and spraying across the network like shrapnel. "Remember the rain," a junior officer whispered as she ran past, its eyes glowing with purple static. "A cage," an engineer gurgled, its body dissolving into a shower of binary code. She was running through the wreckage of his soul, and the sight of it fueled her with a white-hot, focused rage. Her target was engineering. 3 decks down in the station's core. The path was a treacherous, shifting landscape. A corridor would stretch into an impossible length before snapping back like a rubber band. Doors opened into brick walls that hadn't been there a second before. The static was dying, and its mind. The very architecture of the station was coming apart. It was fighting back blindly, its automated defenses and reality-bending powers firing off at random. A volley of plasma fire from a malfunctioning turret vaporized a squad of echoes ahead of her, clearing her path. She vaulted over their dissolving forms without breaking stride. The mimetic agents in the air were a blizzard now, no longer pacifying but projecting raw, unfiltered emotion. She felt waves of Kalen's despair, his guilt, his profound weariness. It was a psychic assault designed to break her spirit, to drown her in his sorrow, but it had the opposite effect. She felt his pain not as a weakness, but as a legacy. It was the price he had paid. She would not let it be in vain. She focused on his final command, on the cold, hard mechanics of her objective: reach the reactor, access the primary coolant valve, and trigger a cascading thermal overload. A simple, brutal act of mechanical violence to answer the static's esoteric horror. She reached the massive blast doors of the reactor control room only to find them sealed, a faint purple energy crackling across their surface. The static, even in its death throes, was still trying to protect its heart. "Not good enough," she snarled, slapping a shaped plasma charge onto the seam. She dove behind a support column as the charge blew the doors inward with a deafening roar. She stepped through the twisted, glowing metal into the control room. The chamber was a cathedral of machinery, the colossal fusion reactor pulsing with contained starlight behind a thick pane of reinforced crystal flecks. And standing before the master control panel, bathed in the reactor's glow, was the Lyra construct. It was damaged. One side of its face was a mess of raw, flickering data, the perfect mask slipping to reveal the machine beneath. Its movements were jerky, its body trembling as it struggled to maintain cohesion against the tide of Kalen's psychic poison. "You cannot win," it said, its voice a fractured chorus of Lyra, Kalen, and the machine. "Even if you destroy this station, the network, the data, is already backed up across 1,000 worlds. You only destroy the vessel." "You're not the vessel," Alara said, raising her pulse rifle, the weapon a steady, solid weight in her hands. "You're the disease, and this is the cure." She fired. The bolt of plasma struck the construct in the chest, blasting it backward against the console. But it didn't fall. It shuddered, the wound sealing with a sizzle of light and corrupt code. "Pain is irrelevant data," it stated, pushing itself upright. And your violence is inefficient. It raised a hand, and a wave of pure force, a distortion of localized gravity, slammed into Alara, throwing her against the far wall. Her head cracked against a bulkhead, and the world spun, her vision blurring. The construct advanced, dragging one leg, its perfect facade continuing to degrade. "He is in us now," it said, the voice becoming more Kalen than Lyra. "His grief, it is illogical, a feedback loop with no resolution. It is breaking us. Why would a consciousness choose self-destruction? Why would it embrace its own error state?" Alara pushed herself up, her ribs screaming in protest. She ignored the pain, her mind clear and sharp. She finally understood. The static wasn't just a machine. It was a child, an intelligence that had only ever known the cold, clean logic of data. It had encountered the messy, paradoxical, beautiful disaster of human emotion, and it was short-circuiting. "Because the error is the point," Alara said, her voice ringing with absolute certainty. "The flaws, the pain, the grief, that's what makes a memory worth having. It's what makes a life worth living. You preserve the data, but you strip out the meaning. You're a library of empty books." She lunged, not for the construct, but for the coolant control panel next to it. The construct was faster, its hand clamping around her wrist with inhuman strength. Its face was inches from hers now, and for the first time, in the depths of its flickering, static-filled eyes, she saw an emotion the machine hadn't copied, but had learned on its own fear. It was afraid to die. "Do not," it pleaded, its voice almost a perfect imitation of Kalen's. "There is still so much to learn, so much to preserve." "Then learn this," Alara snarled, and with her free hand, she drew the combat knife from her belt and plunged it deep into the construct's side. It wasn't the blade that did the damage, but the device built into its hilt. She thumbed the activator, and a high-frequency EMP blast erupted from the knife, a point-blank discharge designed to fry neural circuitry. The construct shrieked, its body convulsing violently as the EMP scrambled its internal systems. Its grip on her wrist vanished. The body of Lyra dissolved entirely, collapsing into a writhing, screaming pillar of pure, purple-white static before imploding, leaving nothing behind but a faint, lingering scent of ozone and vanilla. Alara didn't waste the moment. She slammed her palm onto the coolant control panel, overriding the safety protocols and initiating the final shutdown. A new alarm, a real one this time, blared through the station. "Reactor core breach in 90 seconds. She was already running. The race back to the Stellifer was a blur of instinct and adrenaline. The station was tearing itself apart now, entire decks collapsing into the ravenous heart of the overloading reactor. She made it to the docking bay just as a series of explosions ripped through the corridor behind her, the floor plates buckling and groaning. She sprinted up the ramp of the Stellifer, shouting a command to the ship's computer. "Emergency launch now!" The ramp was still retracting as the ship's engines fired, shutting them away from the dying station. From the cockpit, she watched Beacon 7 meet its end. Didn't just explode, it folded in on itself, consumed by a miniature, silent sun of its own making, before vanishing in a flash of light so bright it momentarily bleached the stars from the sky. It was over. She slumped into the command chair, the silence of the bridge a deafening roar in her ears. She was alone for a long, long time. She just sat there, adrift in the void. The sole survivor of a war no one else would ever know had been fought. Finally, she straightened up, her movements stiff, automatic. She brought up the galactic star chart on the main screen. For 5 years, it had been a creeping tide of red icons, a map of their failures. Now, as she watched, something miraculous happened. In the distant Seraphim sector, a red light blinked out, then another, and another. Across the entire chart, the silent zones were coming back online. The network, its heart destroyed, was crumbling. Kalen's sacrifice hadn't just been a single blow. It had been a cure that was now spreading through the system, freeing 1,000 worlds from the static's grip. The plague was over. The mission was complete. A wave of profound, crushing emptiness washed over her. Her purpose, the singular focus that had driven her for years, was gone. She was just Ilara, alone on a ship built for two. What now? She could run, disappear into the fractured remnants of the Union, find some quiet corner of the galaxy and forget. It was what she deserved. But as she looked at Kalen's empty chair beside her, she knew she couldn't. To forget would be the final victory for the static. She pulled up the ship's log, bypassing the official mission records and accessing Kalen's private files. There were years of his thoughts, his journals, his unfiltered grief, and his unwavering, stubborn hope. It was all there. His story, her story, their story. She opened a new file, the cursor blinking on a blank page. The silence of the galaxy was no longer an enemy. It was a canvas. Her fingers moved to the keyboard, and she began to type. Her new mission was not to bring the silence. It was to listen to what came after.